Thank you, everyone. Could I welcome you all to today's meeting of the Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee. I'd like to remind everybody present at this meeting that this will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Could I ask you all to ensure your mobile phones are switched off or on switch to silent, please? I'd like to welcome our visitor, Sue Whiting. Is she here? Can't see her. Oh, yes. Who will speak at today's meeting. I've received apologies from Mr. Kaufman and welcome Mr. Bill as his substitute. No other apologies? Thank you. We move on to our first agenda item, which is approval of the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of November 2017. I propose that the minutes of the meeting are taken as read, confirmed and signed. All in favour? Yep, thank you. Item number 2, question time. We've received a question from Sue Whiting under Standing Order 35. Could I invite Sue to move to the reserved chair? Thank you for this item. Everyone should have had a copy of the question and answer, which has also been provided to Sue Whiting, so these can be taken as read. I would like to remind members that no discussion is to be held on the question. Sue, would you like to ask a supplementary question? You can ask one supplementary question for your original question, but I would highlight that your supplementary question should be to clarify the reply you received and should not raise any new issues.
Is it that one? Yes. Oh, amazing. Yes, I do have a supplementary question. Do all of the children in age range 11 to 16, that's 20 of them, have EHCPs?
Thank you, Sue.
Thank you.
I'll now just ask the officers whether they're able to respond.
Thank you, Chair. We wouldn't be able to respond to that at the moment. I think the first thing would be that we wouldn't assume they would have education, health and care plans. Those would be where children have additional needs outside of their social care needs. We would expect all of them to have a personal education plan. And if they do, then it would link with the education, health and care plan. So in order for us to answer that question, we'd have to have a look at all of those individual cases. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sue. You're able to obviously stay for the remainder of the meeting and return to public seating or leave as you wish. We now move to item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Orders 7.3 and 7.5, and I have received no questions from members. Item number 4, to advise of any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent elsewhere on the agenda. I've not been notified of any urgent items. Item number 5, any declarations of interest in respect to the items on the agenda? No? Thank you. There are no petitions to be presented under item 7, so we're now going to move on to item 8, which is the medium-term financial strategy 2018-19 to 21-22. This is on pages 15 to 38 of your agenda pack. All members should have a copy of this buff-coloured paper. Is there anyone who hasn't received one of these? It's itemising a process suggested for dealing with budget proposals. We'll discuss each section in turn, and there'll be an opportunity to ask members to ask questions on that particular area at that time. Can I welcome to the meeting Mr. Old, the Cabinet Lead Member, who will be able to answer questions. Paul Meredith, the Director of Children and Families, will present the report, and Jenny Lawrence from Corporate Resources also joins us to assist in answering questions. I'll invite the Director and Cabinet Lead, member to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposals as per the process set out on the buff paper. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. So, obviously a very extensive report, so I'm not going to go through the whole of the report and just set the scene. So the first things to say is what are the big drivers that have led to the production of this report. The first one is obviously the position that the overall council is in terms of having to make savings to balance its revenue budget over the forthcoming years. The second element is the significant pressures that have been emerging within the department, particularly in the area of children's social care services and in terms of the high needs block SEND services as well. The department runs a transformation programme which is extensive to address those pressures that are developing in the department. And on page 16, there are three main elements there within that programme. The first one is care placement strategy. This is a strategy that we're developing within the department to manage the significant pressures that are emerging in the looked after children system. Members will be aware that the numbers of children looked after by the council has risen by nearly 40% in the last 4 years. And the whole of the document, the proposed revenue budget of the forthcoming years is based on assumptions that growth will continue into the future. That growth is not unique to Leicestershire. Most authorities in the country are experiencing significant pressures in their looked after systems as well. The care placement strategy is there of a way for us to provide a much more cost-effective solution. So it looks at how the whole system works and looks both to manage children out of the system or to avoid them coming into the system. Once they're in the system and they're actually looked after, the most cost-effective way of providing placements for those children so that we can make best use of the resources that are available to us. The second main element of the transformation programme relates to our early help offer. This is subject to a separate paper which is out for consultation at present and was presented to Cabinet last week. This is really an area that we're doing with a heavy heart, as it were. We have to find savings into the programme to meet the shortfall in the overall budget. Plus, we're concerned that the government's programme for troubled families will disappear in 2019. And at this stage, there is no indication that that will continue, which would produce a significant hole in the budget of 2.3 million. So we're starting to plan for what we need to put in place to address those two elements. And as I say, that is out for consultation in a document at present. The third main element relates to the high needs block. This is our work with SEND, special educational needs and disabilities. And members will be aware we've had separate reports identifying the pressures in the system and the overspending that's occurring in this system at present. We have a strategy that we're developing, again, to look at more cost-effective ways of managing that system. That will be in a document called the SEND strategy that will be presented to members in the forthcoming weeks. That's largely, again, about us looking at the most cost-effective options that are available to us in improving our local offer to young people in this situation, and also, unfortunately, reviewing the scope of services that we're offering to see whether that's sustainable in the long term, given the finite resources that we have available in this programme. If you look at the proposed revenue budget, you will see that next year there is a significant increase in that budget. We have identified growth requirements of 8.6 million, less proposed savings of 1.4 million. So the budget, the final budget, will be is 68.8 million pounds, which is a significant increase on this year's budget. What I think I will do is leave it at that in terms of where we are with the main budget. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the education budget. And again, members will be aware this is subject to separate papers that have been presented to Cabinet in terms of the new funding formulas that have been introduced centrally and the impact of that on our schools in Leicestershire. In the short term, that is a positive for us in terms of the fact that both our primary schools and our secondary schools will have increases in their budgets the next year and the year after. Our concern is the sustainability of that in the long term, because the arrangements that are in place at present are only short-term arrangements, and it's unclear what's going to happen in the longer term on that. So that is our main concern. If you look under that on page 25, if we look at the high needs element of that, at present you can see that we're predicting an overspend this year of just under £1 million. We estimate next year that could go up to £1.8 million, given the extra pressures that are in the system. And that could increase in future years. That's a particular concern for us because under the proposed arrangements, this money will be ring-fenced. There will be an element of protection for the next 2 years and then potentially ring-fenced. And then we will have to manage within the allocated budget and meet any increases out of that budget. So we're working hard, as I explained earlier, to get much more cost-effective solutions there, but that does present some risk for us in the future. Finally, I'll just touch on the capital programme that's in here. Most of that relates to issues to do with schools or SEND provision which are connected to schools. There's nothing particular that I wanted to highlight to you in that report, that element. There's nothing particularly exceptional that's of concern there. So perhaps that's my very brief overview. I do accept it's very brief, but hopefully you'll have lots of questions that you want to ask us, and we can get into a lot more detail through questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Can I just ask if at this moment the Cabinet Lead Member wants to say anything in introduction?
Thank you, Chair. I think Paul has covered the areas that I would have highlighted. I would say that social care placements, if these proposals are adopted, would have increased by £18 million over the last 4 years, and including the period for this. So we've never, as a council, stinted in meeting the needs of children who have to come into our care. The mention of schools, members need to be aware that it isn't the continuation of the same that we've got at the moment. The Education Funding and Skills Agency has introduced a number of constraints, and so the notion that this is a soft option where local authorities are operating as they were a year ago is misleading. We're having to operate under these new guidance rules, and the clear issue is, up until now, if we've overspent in the high needs block and there's been an underspend in either the early years or the schools block, we could via money across. We can still do that for the new financial year, but it's much more difficult. And you must remember that the current schools funding is only for a 2-year period. If the current national funding formula proposals are not brought into the base budget, then Leicestershire schools 2 years from now will face a serious drop in their income from £150,000 in the lump sum down to £110,000. That doesn't affect us this year and next year, but it could in 2 years' time.
Thank you, Ivan. We'll now open we'll invite questions and comments on the revenue budget proposals from members. We have two questions first. Are they on service transformation or general? Could I ask Mr. Sheehan then? Thank you.
Yeah, I've got some questions on transformation and I've got a further one on growth, but I'll wait for the appropriate time to bring that up. That's fine. Yes, and I think I'm concerned, as I think many of us are, about the proposals to close 25 out of 40 children's centres. It's very worrying, but I think we need to understand how that might happen and try and explore any problems there may be with it. So I'd like to ask, first of all, if we're taking the building away, but we're then taking on the responsibility of mitigating against the loss of service, how do we achieve that if the services, in many cases, most of the services, are not provided by the council but provided by health or whoever? How do we take responsibility for mitigating against the loss?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, just to clarify, Mr. Sheehan, are you asking about if the buildings aren't there, how it would impact partners, or how it would impact the service?
Well, let's just dial it back a bit. You take away the building, you've then got to think about how you mitigate against the loss of the service. What do you do? How do you approach it? Can you take on responsibility for even doing that if the service is not provided by the county council?
Okay, the proposals that went to Cabinet were requesting that we go out to consultation. So the consultation on those proposals starts on the 22nd of January, so haven't opened yet. And part of the consultation is working through an understanding of the impact of the proposed changes. You'll note from the Cabinet paper we're proposing a 0 to 19 service. So the removal of buildings or the stopping of using buildings is really about us maintaining frontline staff. So the proposal is that those staff will deliver services in people's homes. We know that some of the people that we work with already don't travel to our centres or utilise our centres. So we still plan to do outreach work in people's homes. Part of the proposal is a hub and spoke model where we will retain 15, it's proposed 15 buildings through which we'll deliver either group work programmes or kind of drop-in type services should that meet certainly meet families' needs. I think you're right. The other issue is that there are other people that are using our buildings at the moment, and we would need to work through, as part of the consultation, an understanding of how that would work through and whether or not there are other buildings being used. The other point to make is that the proposal isn't to close those buildings. It's to either look at redesignating them or using them for other usage. Obviously, the proposal is that we as a county council retain the use of 15 buildings through which we think we can deliver our service to the most vulnerable families. We would want to explore usage of other community buildings to deliver group work in, and certainly explore alternative use of the buildings that we're suggesting won't be one of our hubs or spokes.
Just continue, because I've got a couple of more questions on the same subject. I mean, I'm just interested a little bit about what you've said about, and you do seem to be acknowledging that there are services that others provide that will have to be mitigated some other way. I mean, the question will be overall whether that service to the end user can be mitigated, can be provided in some other way or not. That's a very important question. And it seems like it's beyond our power to answer that entirely. I think that's worth noting for the future when we look at this in more detail. Now, there's this issue about capital clawback, which is potentially 5.8 million. If the future usage for 0 to 5-year-olds drops below 60%. So who actually bears the loss on that, given that most of the buildings that we've got are leased?
Capital clawback, there is a possibility that could happen. And we put that in the paper and recognise the risk attached to that. As you may be aware, members may be aware, there's been significant closures of children's centres all over the country. And to date, there has been, I think, only a couple of occasions where there's been any clawback, and that's been of quite small figures. So we're not saying that it's not a risk. There is a risk there. We don't anticipate it's going to be a significantly high risk.
I understand what you're saying, that in practice it hasn't happened that much, but I think we need to know where we stand. This is an awful lot of money, you know, and if we can't sort of have much say in what services might be provided in these buildings if we let the lease go, really, can we? Okay. Third question, final one on this section, is that if you're taking a service away from a particular community, a particular area, does that mean that people living in that area will no longer benefit from that service just because they happen to live there where there's no longer a centre? Or are you working out a way to ensure that services are delivered according to need, and therefore you're going to have to think about transport as well as people that have got a children's centre still in their community may lose the service because they've got to make way for somebody else that's in greater need? How are you looking at that issue?
So the proposals that we're looking at in terms of the 0 to 19 service merge 4 of our services, only one of which is delivered through our Children's Centre programme. So our Supporting Leicestershire Families programme has been in place now since about 2013 and only has 4 buildings across the county attached to it. So the model that we've used with that service is to deliver services in people's homes, certainly to the most vulnerable. That's what's most effective. We do hire other community venues to deliver group work. So the idea of the centres being removed equating to a removal of service is certainly not something that we're looking at. Indeed, the model that we're proposing and wanting to consult on is a locality-based model that's very much about front-facing staff who will be still delivering in a locality. So yes, there will be fewer buildings, but actually the majority of our work is already delivered outside of those buildings in terms of across all 4 of those services. So I wouldn't want the loss of buildings to equate to loss of services in those areas. Just the second part of your question in terms of assessing services according to need, the work that we did to get to the identification of the 15 buildings was based on a whole raft of data, both in terms of needs of children and families in the area, footfall across all of our centres, a whole raft of information that actually pointed to where our greatest need communities were, which is where we're proposing to have our hub and spoke buildings.
I think it'd be useful, just finally, Chair, to have sight of that assessment so we can see that you've taken deprivation into account and on what area you've assessed it on. That will be important so we can see how you can make your decisions. Thank you, Chair.
I think it's worth pointing out at this moment in time that once the consultation has been taken, it will come back to this committee with all the information to be fully scrutinised before it goes to council.
Just to remind members that by far the biggest chunk in here relates to the Troubled Families programme, and whether that programme continues will not be an issue for the council. It will be an issue for government about whether they remove the funding, and what this is about is us being ahead of the game to try to plan the potential impact of that, because we have no evidence at this stage that that programme's going to continue. So I think it's important to remember that element as well.
Thank you, Paul. Jeff Welsh.
Thank you, Chair. Even taking account of your point that there'll be a later opportunity to scrutinise this, this is the first chance we've had to talk about these issues since we know it went to Cabinet. And my concerns are about managing the risk and how serious those risks are. And it can be tempting when hearing the officers to hear a rosy picture that all will be well. But on the just 2 very short sentences from the Cabinet paper that went to Cabinet about this, it says the County Council has reduced spending on early help services by 4.4 million, which is 26% of the budget, over the last 3 years. Further reductions could therefore have a highly detrimental impact on social care spending in future years. And then further on in the same paper, it said this risk would need to be tolerated and managed through monitoring of these families and seeking alternative support from partner agencies or community groups where appropriate. Now, the thought that partners, I don't see them out there, and the idea that community groups could pick up this very professional work seems to me a serious risk. And in October 2017, The Association of Directors of Children's Services said, preventative work to manage demand is the only way to secure a sustainable fiscal future of local government, but more importantly, this investment is the best chance we have to turn around the lives of the most disadvantaged children. I am seriously worried that this continued reduction in preventative early help will come back and bite us in the most severe way possible. So I'm interested to hear from officers, or maybe Ivan may be more appropriate, how do you square that circle of reducing the risk while taking away such vital preventative services?
Ivan?
Thank you, Chair. Well, first and foremost, there was a principle established in the paper to Cabinet that we would do everything we could to protect frontline staff. It carried within it a figure that only 4%, if these proposals are accepted, would be affected. And as far as I'm able to determine, that would mean some people leaving the programme earlier than perhaps they would normally have done. They're obviously on the threshold of not needing support anyway. It could cause a delay for some other people, during which point in time I would agree with you, Jeff. Yes, they could deteriorate and become more difficult. But if we're able to manage that saving of 1.5 million, and I think you need to disassociate that from the 2.3. I don't think the 2.3 million is helpful. You consider the 1.5, and our partners have also got to step up to the mark. We've already had the clinical commissioning groups withdraw their support for the Supporting Leicestershire Families programme, when all the evidence that we've got is that health actually benefits the most if appointments are not being cancelled. So in discussions with Paul and other officers, I took the view that we must protect frontline staff as and where we could do that. And what Cabinet did in accepting the paper, it also accepted the fact that the officers were not able to give us the sort of detailed briefing that Sean has talked about. And that is why when we passed the recommendations, there is implicit in those recommendations a requirement on Paul and the senior officers to go out and carry out a full assessment that enables us to see exactly what it will mean when we have to make the decision in the summer. Now, in the interim, I'm meeting the Police and Crime Commissioner shortly. I shall find out what, if any, support his office can offer. The clinical commissioning groups basically said, well, we're not going to put any money into the Supporting Leicestershire Families programme. Next month, I'm speaking at a national conference in London because our Supporting Families programme here is seen as one of the leaders in England, and we know that. I'm hoping that I can find out from some of the people coming what the prospects are for the future. We've got a 2-year window on the 2.3 million, and we need to establish from Joe Took, and we need to go and work with our MPs as to how we continue to get the Supporting Leicestershire Families service funded. I like the idea, and I would recommend the idea of a 0 to 19 family wellbeing service. That seems to me to be an excellent development. When you've got 4 separate strands at the moment, it doesn't make sense not to amalgamate them into a much more unified service, particularly if it becomes more effective to the people who are in receipt of the services that they can offer. So, yes, go out and consult. What we do need is the public out there, the service users out there, and our partners to fully respond and engage in the consultation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ivan. Is there any other questions on service transformation? Mr. Bill?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As a visitor to this committee, I welcome the opportunity to contribute. I suppose as a member of the County Council, you get a chance to oversee other services, other public authorities, other public services, and the picture that there are other agencies willing to step in to help, I think we have to look at with some concern, because the NHS, for a start, is in crisis. It's in crisis on revenue and capital, and it's steadily getting worse. There's certainly no surplus in the police budgets that I can see. In fact, both the NHS and the police, if anything, are withdrawing. Well, the police certainly are withdrawing from frontline activity. Community groups, I suppose that means the voluntary sector, severely under pressure all round, and it relies very much on an ageing group of volunteers who are dropping out, unfortunately. So the prospect that there's other people prepared to come in and take over if the county council withdraws is not very encouraging. I have actually dropped a note through to Jane just now, because I would like to know about the impact on the ground of these proposals, because if we're withdrawing services from buildings, a lot of these buildings are run by other projects which are probably voluntary based mostly, and they rely on these statutory services coming in to maintain all the other services that they do. Because all these community groups, if you like, who are in their own buildings, rely on a variety of income which they have to juggle. And if we start to pull away from that income, this could jeopardise other services, which could again come back and affect the general delivery of what we're able to do to help people. So this has to be approached with care.
Do you want to come back, Jane?
Yes, thank you. I've received your email. The consultation, obviously, that starts on the 22nd of January is absolutely to understand the impact. The majority of the buildings that we deliver through are either on school sites or are LCC owned, but you're right, there are a few that are voluntary sector owned. So part of the consultation will be for us to not only understand the impact on other partners using our buildings, but certainly the impact on the withdrawal of us using buildings that we're currently leasing as well.
Dr. Bremner?
On page... Which page is it? Page 20, the develop wraparound therapeutics services. Or am I in the wrong... Have I jumped ahead? Oh, I beg your pardon, Chair.
Sorry, we're still on transformation.
I will keep my powder dry in that case.
Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say, in terms of other partners, that, the Police and Crime Commissioner particularly really does support Leicester families and has, in the past, put a lot of money in there. I don't quite think that he's about to suddenly jump ship, although I can't speak for him specifically, but we shall look at the budget, Police and Crime Commissioner's committee setting, which is soon in February. And I also don't quite accept the older view that maybe lots of helpers in the voluntary sector are dropping off the edge of the precipice. I really do think that you have to look at this quite carefully. The voluntary groups and support groups which SLF has actually engendered and actually put in place are really run by young, enthusiastic mums. And they really are the bedrock of our future generations. So, Councillor Bill, I can't quite accept the fact that it's all doom and gloom. On the contrary, they're really good and really super people. And they keep coming back, and they do that on a voluntary basis. And having visited and sat in and looked at those, I'm really heartened by the fact that that is a super area, and we won't dump that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Any other questions on transformation before we move on? Okay, can we move on to the proposed revenue budget and other changes and transfers? That's paragraphs 8 to 13, pages 16, 17 and 18. And it also links with Appendix A at 33. Any questions? Rosita?
Thank you, Chairman. Just for information, the proposed budget revenue, paragraph 8, there is budget transfer and adjustment, 814,000. In number 12, it says a public health transfer, of 800,000. Is that one and the same? And if not, what are we talking about in relation to the public health transfer? Thank you.
Jenny, thank you.
Thank you. The transfer that's actually set out in paragraph the 814,000 does not include the public health transfer. There are some ongoing conversations being held regarding moving some contracts that link into the early help review back into children and family services, so they can be picked up as part of that, and that will be something that feeds through the budget into the next cabinet report.
Any other questions? No? No. Then we'll move on to growth and savings proposals. And there is a key here provided for you to for the categorisation of items unchanged from previous MTFS, items included in previous MTFS but amendments made, and new items, so if members can be aware of that. Thank you. This is on Appendix B. Has anybody got any questions on that? Deborah.
Thank you, Chair. It's just page 19, the first bullet point on that page, sufficiency in the market for independent fostering agency placements. Just really, that's quite concerning to read there that, independent agencies are choosing what children they can and avoiding the people with the less complex needs, and that's resulting in a £2,650 per place per week. That's quite a lot of additional money. Can I just inquire what we're actually doing to try and get more foster carers that are prepared to take children with complex needs, and what can we do to try and get away from paying £2,500 extra per child per week? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We, as part of the care placement strategy that Paul outlined earlier in the meeting, we are working to increase the number of in-house foster carers. And as part of that, some of those will be carers who are able, with support, to take the more complex young people. The wraparound therapeutic service and our dedicated placement support team are examples of where we've already established, or we're in the process of establishing, support that can work with those youngsters and work with the carers to enable children and young people to stay with our in-house carers. So they are the key things that we are doing to address the need for more in-house foster placements. In relation to the IFAs, we continue as part of the East Midlands work to address with those agencies the need for them to take carers, or them to take children who have got more complex needs. But unfortunately, it's a market where the demand is so great across the country that IFAs are receiving a large number of referrals for every placement they have, so they are in a position where they can take the children and young people that are less complex, and that has resulted in other authorities, not only here, of some of those with more complex needs that could be supported in a family placement having to go into residential care. One of the other key things that we've done as taken to Cabinet, we're looking at the fee structure for our foster carers. So that has recently been to Cabinet and is out for consultation. So that's to increase the bottom payment, the lower payment that we pay to new carers, and to actually make the top of that scale less complicated. So that is seen part of our recruitment campaign for our in-house foster carers.
That was sort of my follow-on question, is how are we comparable to independent fostering agencies? I know we offer a lot more training and things like that, I'm well aware of that, but sort of payment-wise, are we on par with independent fostering agencies?
We haven't been on par, which is part of the reason that we've recently done the work that's gone to Cabinet around fees. On average, our an IFA placement costs us £15,000 more than an in-house placement. What I can say is the feedback that we get from our carers and the feedback we get from IFA, people who have fostered for IFA placements and have made a positive decision to come over and be foster carers for this local authority, is that the support and training they get is as important to them, if not more important, than actually the fee, and that is part of the package. And they report very positively on what Leicestershire offers. So as part of our work and campaign, and as part of our recruitment campaign, we've done more work around the recruitment, the website. We've done more about word of mouth. The events that we hold for potential or prospective foster carers, we get our carers to come along and talk to them about fostering for Leicestershire, as our young people have made a video and a part of that training. So the training and support I think we're very good on, and we get very positive feedback. Now we've done the work around the fee structure that's out for consultation, I think that puts us in a stronger position.
Thank you, Jane. Mr. Old.
Thank you, Chair. You will recall just over a week ago, yourself, me, Trevor and Sean had a meeting with the fostering and adoption people, and we were given a very comprehensive breakdown over an hour and 20 minutes of exactly where that particular programme is. Last week at Cabinet, we accepted the fact that the bottom level 0, is to be lost and amalgamated, and at the top end, as Sharon has already said, reduce the complexity and put them all, how can I put this? Level 5 and level 6 will be amalgamated into a single band, and the resources will be allocated according to the needs of the particular child who is in care. I was certainly very reassured with the meeting that we had. I think, I can't speak for the other people who were present, they would have to say it for themselves. Nothing was hidden from us at all, and in an hour and 20 minutes on a single subject, you can go into this background in a really searching way, which I think actually we did.
I can reiterate that. I found it a very useful meeting, and the work going on in that department is really making changes. Paul, did you want to come back there, or has Ivan covered it?
Point members to the new website. I know Sharon mentioned it, but I saw it the other day, and I think it is a good reflection about how we're changing the culture in that department. And when I spoke in Cabinet last week, I talked about the word of commercialisation, and I think that's the kind of culture that we're instilling in that department now, because, like it or not, that is the world that service operates in now, is a commercial world. And I think our staff are doing a fantastic job in terms of grasping those issues and really transferring the service. So if you do get a chance, please go on the website and have a look at that. It's in the main council's website, but you can go into the specialist section. Any feedback will be welcome, of course.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a question on paragraphs 15 and particularly 16, with also some reference to Appendix B. We can see social care placements going up quite sharply by 5.9 million and then rising by about 3 million a year to 14.7 million over the next 3 years. If you look at the number of children in care that's driving this, apparently, that goes up from 565 to 769, which I calculate as an increase of 36% over 4 years. It's about 7 or 8% a year, we're told. I wonder if Jenny could just explain a little bit how these figures match up, because I'm not quite seeing all the assumptions there that you've made that say that you will need this money but not that amount. It's a lot of growth in a context of what we're doing with the council's budget overall. We need to be sure, we need to be confident this is an appropriate amount of money to meet these very important needs.
Thank you. There's a very complex set of figures behind the projections, because there is no direct and obvious correlation between the numbers of children in care and cost the placement mix affects the costs that we're encountering. What the projections do is follow on from the things that Sharon's just talked about, and assumes that the number of children in care coming in, or the additional number of children in care coming in over the period of the MTFS, come into care at the lower cost bracket. So what we will see over the term of the MTFS is a reduction in the high cost placements, which are the children in residential care, to be replaced by lower cost placements. So the cost and the numbers are slightly divorced. What it also does, the growth, is also picks up on the growth that we see in 2017-18. Members will probably be aware that the budget for placements is forecast to overspend this year. So effectively the figures that you see within the MTFS period are effectively 5 years, because it starts us off 2018-19 in the place that we need to be, and then takes those assumptions. The numbers will also take us to be in line with our statistical neighbours over the number of the proportion of children in care that Leicestershire has. What we can't say with any certainty is that this is going to be what 4 years' time will look like. There's a lot of environmental factors, external factors that could impact upon the number and the cost of children in care. But from the trends that we see at the moment, the forecasts that we have in here adequately and correctly reflect the trend in number of children in care that we see coming into the service, but also the type of placement that they ultimately end up in.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy with that.
Okay. Dr. Bremner.
Page 19. Just a comment about the new social care agency, Prima. I know this has been talked about for some time, but I personally welcome the value that is placed in the staff that are at the front line in social work, and to retain them, because I think some social workers feel both very proud, but also in some areas undermined and under pressure. So the more that we can level our playing field of remuneration and increase it, the better and greater opportunity you'll have to maintain the staff that you've already described, Paul. And going forward, your then saving on agency work will have a double positive.
Jeff Walsh.
I'd just like to come back to the fostering point. Firstly, to say how much I support these changes. I think the Scrutiny Committee has commented on a number of occasions about the benefits, and these to me are the type of savings we should be looking at. These are true transformation. I notice at the end of the 4-year MTFS, we're looking at nearly £3 million a year saving. So this is real saving for no loss of service at all. In fact, I would argue a better service than children were getting with independent fostering agencies. I just have one question, though. It was unfortunate I couldn't get on Friday, and I'm sure I could have asked the question then. I accept that the support we offer our own foster carers and our training are important, but there's no doubt that remuneration forms a part of the thinking of some foster carers. So in preparing the transformation, did we do any market testing at all upon people who work for an IFA to see whether we'd pitched the financial aspect at this point at the right point?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We did, and we engaged a consultant to work with us who'd actually had been a chief executive previously of an independent fostering agency up in the northeast. So we did a lot of benchmarking around that.
I do like that answer. That's how you transform services and win.
Trevor Pendleton, thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Just to go back again and pick up on Jeff's point and our meeting last Friday, what has actually happened is that already we've seen that we're getting the drift back from independent fostering agencies to our in-house. And I think that's testimony to the work that the officers here and to this scheme's impact. I just wanted to mention that so that we didn't lose sight of it. And I think the more that we do along those lines, Jeff, through you, Chair, the better we will be, and the more our costs will reduce accordingly.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Bill.
We're talking about the increased demand on services for children in care. I was at a meeting of heads at Hinckley at some point before Christmas, and one of the heads made a statement which struck home to me, and I'm just wondering if we could have a response, and that is that she's spending her time not in teaching children, but she's spending her time in looking after their social needs. She gets the impression, she was under the impression that because of the pressure that children are under in this kind of area of concern, that instead of doing the work which she was presumably trained to do as a head, she's acting as spending 50% of her time on social work. And I know that's not a matter for this budget, but at some point, if I could ask for that to be addressed and some response, because presumably if it's happening to one school, it must be happening to other schools as well.
Thank you. Can we now move on to savings transformation? It's paragraph 17, pages 20 to 21. Any questions on this area? Paul Brenner.
A couple of things, actually. Going back to page 20 I had earlier, the wraparound therapeutic support services just at the bottom part of page 20, what I wanted to focus on in that actually was the looked after children, Chair. I had the privilege of being with looked after children some years ago, going on what you might call day breaks, and being with some of these children. And I think what's really been helpful, as a counsellor earlier and as a county councillor now, if you get more opportunities to meet the service users, you get much better knowledge about what is actually going on. So I, from my point of view, would like to say that I think we as councillors need more opportunity to meet, if service users are willing, just to get a better idea of need and service impact. But within the looked after children, the word that strikes me here is rehabilitate. And it's an interesting word, and it's a great word. But what I'd also say is a lot of the children themselves have a great character of strength, and they just need that extra wraparound to be rehabilitated, and that, whatever that word means for them. And I think if we can achieve that, then the funding going to these children will be reducing as they are supported within the family context. So I'd like to commend that, Chair, and I commend that to the scrutiny panel.
Thank you. Rosita?
Thank you, Chairman. I may be a little bit dim, but I'm finding this time the report is not as clearly written as in previous years, and I had to reread several items a couple of times. Now, could you please explain under transformation the first paragraph to me? I still can't explain it, and it's just for my personal satisfaction. The target is reduced from the 500 set out by 390. I can't quite equate to that. Could you just explain how that figures, please?
We're on page 20, is it?
Page 20, 17, transformation, the first paragraph.
So this is about the new departmental
Yes.
operating model.
Yes.
That's about a restructuring of the management and the overall service. So it really is basically about looking at a new structure that we're operating in the department to identify efficiencies and savings. That's really what that relates to.
Yes. Yes, but I still don't understand. From the 500 set out by 390, so there's 110 was completed. However, do this be delivered? This resulted in a 290 shortfall in the budget. How do we get there? I mean, I can't get my head around that.
We'd identified a certain saving and it wasn't possible to actually achieve that saving, so we had to go back and relook at it. It's as simple as that. Right. There were a number of posts that were in the structure that had got short-term funding that was coming to an end. So even when we reduced some of the actual size of the department, it wasn't possible to achieve long-term savings on that. So that's in essence what that relates to.
And you still then maintained a shortfall of £290,000. That is what you're trying to say. Oh.
Paul Bramley.
Hopefully this question is appropriate here. Just an overall question, which I shared with a colleague here on the panel just now. Children in care, children that are being looked after, children that are fostered, does the council hold, when it looks at the data and makes the assumptions, do you know where in the county there might be hotspots of the care or fostering, or hotspots even, I don't think this would be true, but even within a demographic group?
Yes, Chair. So as part of the data, we would know, we would know and do know the particular areas that more children or young people may come into care from. We also know whether what the demographics of those youngsters are. So if we've got more older young people coming in from a particular area that parents and carers are requesting that they come into care on a voluntary basis, we would have all of that data and information, and we use that information. So if we are having targeted recruitment drives in particular areas to actually get more carers in a particular geographical area.
Okay, if there's no further questions, we're moving on to departmental savings, paragraph 17, page 21. Any questions on that? Ms. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. The third paragraph down in the departmental is about the academy conversions, and stating that it's slowing down. It's got a slower rate. Now, is that because people are going off the idea of converting their school to academies, or just the majority have been turned to academies, please?
I think there's a number of reasons. We do have a large number of academies within Leicestershire, so by that fact, the conversion rate will be slower. I think it's also as a result of the white paper being withdrawn that then removed the impetus really for kind of moving more quickly. We are still seeing quite a few of our schools converting, and certainly some of those that were in progress already. But this savings target does remain in place because we do still predict that there will be a number of conversions this year.
Any further on that area? Okay. So we move on to the dedicated schools grant, pages 22 and 23. Anything for anyone want to ask any questions on this? Okay, I think it's been fairly explanatory in the paper. No? Okay, we'll move on to schools block. Page 23, 24. Jeff Welsh.
At this point, we don't know the actual effect for each individual school. Might be useful to ask at this point, when will individual schools understand what this would mean to them?
Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. We went to consultation on the draft figures that the Department for Education issued in September, and each school was able to see the impact from that draft data. The data has since been updated, so we're currently remodelling school budgets based on the October 2017 census, which will be with schools probably by the first week in March.
Jeff?
Just to further to that, it's my understanding now that schools have been promised that they will not have a reduction in their budget with the new formula, but does that include inflation and for example, salary increases? Could they potentially, in fact, have less disposable money once those things are taken into account?
Thank you. The impact on schools is quite varied. We have a number of schools, particularly primary schools, that sit at the lowest end of the increase, who could potentially have inflationary pressures that are greater than the increase that they will see per pupil. But we're working quite hard with schools at the moment to prepare them for any changes and working through what it might mean for them. And there will also be schools that have got falling numbers on roll that will see a decrease in their overall budget.
Okay. We'll move on to high needs block then. Mr. Sheehan.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Page 26, paragraph 32, which is the last one in this section. I was trying to understand this, and I think I've just about managed to do that, but the sentence at the end and it completes that paragraph rather abruptly, and it doesn't sort of go into what the consequences might be of not being able to fund the DSG overspend in future years. I mean, I can't even tell whose problem that is and how it might be managed. So could you give us a little bit more on this, please?
Yes, thank you. We have running a high needs block project, which is charged with ensuring that actually an overspend on high needs will not happen. That will include the development of a financial strategy where we will look to effectively provide ourselves with a working balance that will moderate any increases and decreases in resources and needs over that period. But ultimately, if that block runs out, the local authority still has a statutory responsibility to provide for the needs of those pupils. So whilst we are pretty confident it won't happen, it would ultimately rest with the local authority on the county council budget.
So in the worst case scenario, the reserves would take a hit. Is that what you're saying? Right.
Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. On page 25 at point 8, the High Needs Inclusion Project, and obviously just towards the end of that paragraph is the loss of the protection would increase the savings requirements from 2.7 to 6.7 million. Can you just explain a little bit more about that project, what the protection is and what might happen if we lose this protection?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just explain a bit about the project, then hand over to Jenny around the answer around the protection. The High Needs Inclusion Project is the strategy that we've got in place that's looking at a whole range of spend across the high needs block with a view to certainly reducing our overspend, but as Jenny described, getting us to a place where we've got a manageable budget. So there are a number of different strands within that high needs strategy. So one of which is around how we case plans, how we assess children, looking at our eligibility criteria, all of those issues. Another strand of it is about developing local provision. So we do have significant spend within the independent sector at the moment, mainly because we don't have the provision locally. So part of it is looking at what we develop locally in order to keep children not just in better cost-effective settings, but actually closer to home and better supported. And we're also doing some work at the moment around a broader inclusion agenda as well, so how we work with schools to keep children in mainstream school. So we've got some inclusion funding that's going into schools at the moment to support children in mainstream, but also looking at how we develop various different interventions as well. So there's a whole raft of work that's taking place that it's looking at certainly reducing the overspend in the high needs block, but getting to us to a place where it's manageable.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Can you just come back on that? This high needs inclusion project is to reduce the overspend you just said. So how much overspend have we got now, and by how much are we looking to reduce this?
So in paragraph 27, what we've done is we've outlined that if we do nothing at all and take no action, we would be projecting an overspend on the high needs block of about 2.6 million in 2020. So those predictions are made based on us taking no actions and not kind of reaping the benefits of the inclusion project. So the target that we're working towards in terms of the high needs strategy at the moment is us reducing that 2.6 overspend, projected 2.6 overspend, in order to not overspend on that high needs budget.
Ms. Meredith.
I'll just add the context of that is we're not dealing with a static group of young people here. It's about 3,600, but the young people who qualify for EHC plans as part of that group is on a significant increase. I think we supported about 300 extra last year in it. So it is a hugely demanding task, a bit not perhaps of the same ilk that we've got in terms of looked after numbers, but we've got an increasing profile of need, and that potentially in 2 years' time we're just going to have a flat budget. So it is quite a challenging situation that the council face.
Thank you. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back? I think Jenny was going to just a bit more about at the end of that paragraph about the protection. I think Jenny was going to explain a little bit more. If you could just do that, please.
Yes, certainly. 2018-19 sees the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant move to a formula basis. It has previously been set at the level of expenditure that we had in previous years. There's also been a guarantee from the Department for Education that no local authority will lose funding over the following 2 years. So that £4 million protection is the difference between what the formulaic allocation gives Leicestershire and what Leicestershire currently has. And it's one of those areas where we're looking for some assurances about the level of protection continuing past 2019-20.
Okay. We'll move on to Central Services block, paragraphs 33, 34, page 26. Any questions? No? Okay, early years block, paragraph 35, page 27. Okay. Savings under development, page 27. Other funding sources, pages 27, 28. All okay? Oh, Mrs. Page.
Yeah, just a quick one. If one looks at the items listed under other funding sources, and I realise with those also comes an additional responsibility. And I'm sure our officers have looked at this in detail. But for instance, and I'm just jumping ahead, but we could have a small grant but a larger expenditure. So how is this worked? Say, for instance, and I'm going on to paragraph 38 now, I'm sorry, but if we have a capital and we have, say, hang on, what did I just want to say? Oh, unaccompanied children or whatever, and if all of that is rising, can that be met within those grants, if you see what I'm trying to say? Or how will we accommodate if that doesn't meet within the grant? Am I formulating it right? Yeah, I think so.
So if we look at unaccommodated asylum-seeking children, I think that's a good one to look at. We know that at present, the amount of grant aid that we get from the government covers about 50% of the actual costs for that service. So in essence, what the council is doing there is subsidising the government by about 50% of the costs. Now at present, what we're doing in that, we're meeting our statutory responsibilities, because there's a number of areas in here and other areas where what happens is that we get given additional responsibilities by the central government, but no additional funding to meet those. We do have to meet as a council our statutory responsibilities, but it puts us in an invidious situation where we're trying to do that with a limited funding available. And the unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, I think, is a classic example of that. And as members know, we've said, yes, we will meet our statutory responsibilities, but we will not go any further. So some of the other voluntary schemes that operate, the National Transfer Scheme, etc., we are refusing to take part at this point in time. We want to prioritise Leicestershire children, which is what we're doing, and we're waiting for the government that's actually reviewing the funding arrangements for this. I think they recognise now that what's happened before is inadequate. Whether we will get sufficient funding in the future, we will see. But primarily what we have to do as a council is that we do have to meet our statutory responsibilities in the resources that are made available to us and do the very best that we can.
May I come back? So how does that reflect on all the other items? Because a lot of these fall into, I know this is the best example, but there are some of the others, like the youth justice, good practice and whatever. Do we support any of the others, or have we taken that same sort of approach across all of the things that we work within the limited grants? Because otherwise, I mean, it will reflect onto our future budget, does it not?
Well, if the council has a statutory responsibility to provide a service, we have to provide the service. If there is any discretion on that, we would look very carefully at it and say, a bit like we're doing at the present time with the early help offer, where we're saying we've got to try and do the best we can with the resources available. We might like to provide more, but we can't. If there is any discretion, that's fine. Some of these grants are adequate. I'm not suggesting all of them are not adequate. If we look at the early years block, where we're getting the funding for the 30 hours, that's been a success story in Leicestershire, and we're well ahead of the game of other authorities. We're a pilot authority, and we're doing very well on that. And although there's been a national debate about whether there's sufficient funding to provide that service, what we're finding in Leicestershire is that there is sufficient funding. We've worked very closely with providers, and the service is working very well. So there's always the opportunity for us to get and manage these things the best we can, and that's what we'll always endeavour to do. but as I repeat, on certain occasions, however efficient and effective and well managed you are, if the shortfall is that, then you can't do it. But if we have a statutory responsibility, the council always meets its statutory responsibilities.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, can I invite any other questions or comments? Jeff, thank you.
There's been no view really expressed by the Scrutiny Committee on any of the points for the MTFS, and I think members realised I was really worried about the early help situation, and I am aware that we will have an opportunity to discuss that during the consultation, but I'm also conscious that these comments go to the Cabinet meeting which set out the MTFS. So I think this committee should say something about the early help, and I move the following: that this Scrutiny Committee expresses grave concern that the risks associated with the proposed reduction in early help, including the closure of so many children's centres, are excessive and will potentially lead to more children going into local authority care.
Okay, we have that proposal on the table and it's seconded. All those for? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Whilst I hear what Councillor Welsh is saying, could I have a comment from the officers again, because I'm not sure, because the model, we're not really reducing any staff, so we don't actually know whether there is this great concern that will end up children going to be in care. So could you give me some words around that to reassure me before I make up my mind what I'm going to do here?
So there's a very comprehensive paper that was presented to the Cabinet that outlines all the background information to where we are. And I think I've said this, and other officers have said it, is that we're not doing this joyously. We think, given the situation we're in the council, which is desperate, it is the best option that's available to us at this point in time. I think the integration of the service is a positive step forward. I think we probably would have thought of going down that route, irrespective of whether we had to find savings or not. And the second point that I made earlier is that what we have to think about here, some of this rests on the door of the government, who at this stage are not giving us any commitment beyond 2019 that there will be funding available for these services. So that's the bulk of the impact here is in the removal of that service, not the 1.5 million that we've talked about previously. So beyond what the detailed analysis that's actually provided in the Cabinet paper, I'm not sure we can say any more unless Jane wants to say any more.
Thank you. So we have this proposal on the table. Sorry? Did you want to come back first, Mr.
I just want to briefly say that, we've heard it now twice that it's down to the government that we're losing this grant. I mean, the government are not here to be questioned, so we've got to make our voice heard, and I think this motion is a very good way of doing that, so I'm going to support it.
Okay, can I have a show of hands, those who are in support of this motion, please? Raise your hands. Thank you. All those against? Any abstention? Thank you. Okay, so that motion. Can you do? It's too late, I think, isn't it? Shouldn't you say that ahead? Let me just check on the Constitution. Yeah, you have to say before the vote's taken, I'm afraid.
Yes, I'd like my name recording.
I do understand that. I just had to check the Constitution. As chairman, I didn't want to put my foot out of line. Okay, are there any more questions, comments from members of committee, cabinet lead member or officers on the revenue budget proposals before we go on to capital? No, right, so now we'll move on to the capital programme, please. Paul or Ivan, do you want to make any introductions on that, or have you already done? So, okay. So we'll go on to questions for capital programme, paragraphs 38 to 42, pages 28 to 30, please. Any questions? Sorry, I didn't see who was first. Canon Lewis?
Thank you, Chair. Interesting to note that there's a number of Church of England schools noted on the capital programme. It would be helpful if Darson Board of Education were consulted regarding proposals for capital works to church schools. That would be helpful. Thank you.
Is that okay? Good, that will happen. Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's on page 29 under the SEND provision capital grant. Just inquiring a sort of a further update on the grant, if we're going to get that money and what it's going to be spent on and how much, please.
Yes, we're definitely getting the grant. It's due to be coming in. It has been announced that we're definitely getting it. We're required to submit to government a plan for spend of that grant prior to us spend. So part of our sufficiency strategy is working up where we intend to spend the capital grant.
Will that be going out to consultation at all, or will it just be an in-house discussion and that's it, or will we have chance to look at it or anything?
It'll be part of the SEND strategy, so it'll be consulted on as part of that. As part of the SEND strategy consultation, so yes is a quick answer to your question. Just to note, we have already invested capital funding within SEND already, because whilst the allocation is 2.1 million in total, it is only 0.7 per year, so it's not a significant capital grant. So we are already investing some capital monies in the development of SEND provision over and above this as well.
Okay, any further questions on that or comments? Sorry, Dr. Bremner.
It's actually on page 29, section 106 contributions, and then over the page capital programme 2019-20. First question, Chair, was that I assume that the schools section 106 figures in that paragraph are for county council schools, not academies. Is that correct? Because it seemed very low to me. That was all.
The section 106 contributions in there will be for the delivery of places, whether they be at an academy or a maintained school.
Okay.
Local authority has the responsibility to supply the places in both.
Okay. In that case, as a former district councillor, it's also incumbent upon the districts to look at their growth plan and within the planning authority's remit to deliver the growth plans for each area, because they can clearly see the support they will give to the schools in their area and the children in their area. So I think it might be mindful, I'm sure they know, that each planning authority should be looking very carefully at proposed developments, that they work within their strategic development plans to deliver growth.
Rosita?
Thank you. We do that here, and I forgot the name of the officer, but we've had a presentation Councillor, yes. So if you want a presentation over your area, it is available. But my concern about this is that there is a big move to studio schools and innovation centres. And I understand that studio schools and innovation centres are not necessarily, I thought they're not necessary, there isn't the uptake. And so there are places. However, those vacant places, as I understood, and correct me rightly, are counted towards the secondary education places. And therefore, then we cannot request the Section 106 monies for the secondary places. So I feel that maybe in future there is a disparity which needs to be addressed. So, but could you just clarify that for me one more time, if I got that right? So the studio schools do not, Ivan?
Chair, it is correct. An ongoing feeling of angst in Colville is with the housing development, and we are stuck with spare capacity at the Stevenson Studio School, which means that we cannot then ask for 106 money. And the other factor that impacts on us is where affordable homes are going in. Now, the paradox here is that affordable homes produce more children, but frequently we're told that it isn't viable for the local authority to receive any money. And I have been in discussions with one or two of the district and borough councils to that effect. We had in the summer here, every councillor, every county council was invited to a briefing session on a district by district basis. It's fair to say that the take-up was patchy. We'll probably repeat it next year because demographic trends clearly alter. And my recommendation, Chair, would be that when you get an invitation like that, come along and find out what's happening in your area.
Thank you. Anything further on that item? Okay, so we'll move on to item 9. That's the Q2 17-18 performance report, page 39 to 54.
Okay, Chair, if I draw members' attention to the report and the detail in the report, the Q2 report reports on 30 measures where we've seen 8 where there's improved performance, 14 where there is no significant change to the performance we're making, and 3 where there's been a decline. And over on page 40 onwards in the report, it outlines the details of some of those, against some of those targets. In relation to children's social care, we can see that our review of child protection conferences, and that includes our performance against having initial child protection conferences within 15 working days, continues to be very good. The percentage of children remaining on a child protection plan for 2 years or more is seen to be a good rate for Leicestershire, because that's about the 2 years or more would be seen to be some drift. Either by that time a child and their circumstances should be such that the child protection issues are minimised, or we have to make a decision that the home circumstances for that child are not the right circumstances. We continue to do well around placement stability, and children in care not being moved, not having more than 3 places or above. So that continues to be a good news story for Leicestershire, as does the percentage of care leavers who are in suitable accommodation. The key areas that continue to have robust management oversight and further exploration are around the children becoming subject to child protection plans for a second or subsequent time. Panel members will know that this historically became an area of concern for the authority when the figure had risen to, I think it was 34.5%. Work was done in the area, and last year's overarching and overall figure had reduced in line to our statistical neighbours, which is 18%. Although quarter two we've seen a rise in the figure to 29.4%, what I can say is that from December's figures, we are showing that for the year we will be looking at approximately 25% of children that are on child protection plans being there for repeat plans. That continues to be an area of robust and monthly management oversight. For December, as an example, we had no new children that became subject to plans where they were in this category. We've done a number of audits, so what I can reassure the panel is that we, for every child who is made subject to a child protection plan, where it be the second or subsequent time, that is done via a service manager oversight as to whether that's right that that child goes to conference, and the safeguarding unit audit the circumstances of that child, so we know whether what's been happening, and we've got a really good grip on that young person's circumstances. What recent work, and when I say recent I mean over the last 12 months, has shown is that those children and families in the main, and probably in the entirety, are made up of circumstances where neglect is the main denominator, main risk, and where the children are living in households where domestic abuse, parental mental health and substance misuse are factors, and they are therefore circumstances and family circumstances that can be chaotic by that very nature. For concerns, what we have seen is that the period of time between plans has increased, and whilst we wouldn't want a child on to have more than one period on a child protection plan, what this shows is we haven't got children bobbing along in Leicestershire where they're going on to a plan, very quickly coming off and very quickly going back on. There are significant periods of time in between these child protection periods of planning for those youngsters. The other key message, and I did report this into the Safeguarding Board on Friday, is that whilst this remains an area of robust oversight, we need to make sure and be satisfied that we're not in trying to address the figures, making any decision that a child that should be on a child protection plan doesn't go on a plan. And what I can reassure members is that for every child that has gone on a plan for a second time and their circumstances and case have been reviewed, the decision for this period of child protection planning is seen to be appropriate. The other key areas for children's social care are around the health assessments and in particular dental checks. So we've reviewed and have in place now far tighter processes around the monitoring and reporting on health assessments within timescales. That includes the review health assessments, and ourselves and a colleague from health review those on a monthly basis. That information is reported to me and now is shared with lead member sessions and has got oversight by the Corporate Parenting Board. In relation to dental checks, we do know that there has been a recording issue around Mosaic, which doesn't answer the question in its entirety, but we do know that some have been recorded as health. In some health assessments, it is an inputting issue of not ticking the dental checks. So that data cleansing has taken place, and we will be reporting in the next quarter where we are with that. So that will no longer be seen as an issue that could be causing a problem because the data cleansing will have been completed. Unless there are any questions on the social care elements, I'll hand over to Jane, who will take you through early help and schools.
Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. It's just about on page 41, 19 to 20, the annual health checks and the dental checks. You've just explained a little bit of the issues there. It would be good to know, because I know last review we had of this was that you're saying children are within their rights to refuse the dental checks and the health checks. It would be good, is that data available about how many children have actually refused? Because then we can see, you know, I know the percentage is low, but if there's a high percentage of refusals, that would be good to know. And also, what are we doing to actually promote the children to get them to understand that the health checks and the dental checks are really important? We don't want them just saying no. We need to explore why they're saying no and what promotion we're doing to ensure that they do take place.
Yeah, we do. We do have those figures. In the monthly figures that are reported, we can see and have evidence of the circumstances around whether that's an older young person who's refused a health assessment, or what the circumstances are and how we are addressing. In relation to encouraging young people around the health assessments, we don't simply take no for an answer. We work very closely with our looked after nurses and actually working with the Children in Care Council about the importance of health and how we support young people to have those checks and have passports around their health and their health needs going forward. Sorry, Jeff, your turn.
The social care panel and its two panels below spent a lot of time looking at some of these figures in the past, and I'm really pleased with some of them. I think we should acknowledge some of the real improvements that have been made, and the stability of placements, both the number of placements and then how long they go on for. Those figures have continued to improve quarter after quarter. Now, for young people in foster care, it's a really difficult time in their lives, and placement stability is one of the key things that will improve the experience that those young people have. So for all the officers who have put in so much work, I think this is absolutely fantastic. On the only really poor area, if we call it that, I'm not sure saying poor or good it's not that simple, but where children are having to go back on a care plan, we've sort of tried to tease out the issues behind that for a long time now, and I'm really pleased to hear that the decision to put another care plan in place is not influenced by the fact that there's more than one. That should reassure us all that we're doing the right thing. But teasing out some of those issues, I don't think this is the place, and I do recommend that we have another look at those figures at the social care panel, particularly looking at the ending. I'm really interested in how we end care plans and whether we're making the right judgments at that point. And it may well be that it doesn't matter a great deal, but I think we need to understand whether it's wasteful in resources to stop a plan and then restart one, and what the impact are on the young people. I think that bit about making sure that young people are at the front of our thinking in terms of how we pursue these issues. But I hope we can do that in the future, Chair. Thank you.
Mrs. Seaton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got to agree with Councillor Walsh. Most of these, the majority of the figures are going the right way, in the right direction, and it's to be commended. My question is really a bit of understanding. It's about the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, and I'm assuming that these will be filled in by the healthcare professionals. What happens though with those 14? It places Leicestershire, a score of 14 places Leicestershire in the second quartile. I've got no measurement on that, whether it's good or bad. But what does that flag up? Do we respond to that with a wraparound service, say, or something like that? Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The strengths and difficulties questionnaires are initially filled in by carers of young people, and there would be an input depending on the age of the young person for them to obviously input to that. They then do go to a health professional who's completing the review, health assessment. So the information is used and needs to be used not only for that individual young person about their health needs, but the reason that we are really pushing that these are completed is that it will also help us pick out themes across our looked after children population. So when we're looking at services, when we're looking at demand, we can see if there are any particular areas that would support the general population of our young people as well as individuals. In relation to the scores of 14 and 16, that is seen as young people who are requiring more than the universal health services. So they tend to be, but not entirely, young people where their emotional well-being, they need some additional support to deal with some aspects of their life and their health around it. So it's really important that we get those scores correct. It's really important that those individual young people are picked up by health and we look at the right therapeutic, if that's what's needed, service for them. But we are doing far more and need to do far more, making sure that more of those strengths and difficulties questionnaires are completed.
Thank you. Mr. Pendleton.
Thank you, Chairman. I just want to give the panel some reassurance around the child protection plan continued or individuals going back onto those plans. As Mr. Welsh will know, he serves on that committee which I chair, and I know that we will need now to look at the time span between the first plan and the second plan. I don't think we've actually articulated that clearly enough in our thinking, and I think it is now time that we went again to look at that. And certainly I will bear testimony to the fact that the officers have been acerbic in their approach to looking and managing this particular aspect. And I'm indebted to Chairman to Mr. Walsh for actually articulating that as well. We will be onto this and continue to look at it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to the education part then, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I can just take you back to page 41 at the top, where it outlines our performance around early help. As you can see, that there were well over 7,000 individuals who accessed our early help services over the last quarter, and it's slightly higher than the same period last year, albeit slightly lower than the beginning of quarter, but we're seeing a relatively consistent number of people accessing our services, and also a relatively consistent number of those families who are receiving a very targeted intervention from our early help services as well. And then, as outlined in paragraph 18, there were only 37 early help cases that were stepped up to social care in that last quarter, which shows another reduction in terms of the numbers of children requiring a social care intervention who are open to early help services. In relation to paragraphs 22 onwards, we've outlined again our performance around criminal justice. So we continue to see low numbers of children entering the criminal justice system and becoming our first-time entrants. And our reoffending rates by young people remains very strong, and certainly our performance in relation to nationally is very good. And our numbers of young people in custody, again, remains very low. In relation to education quality, the percentage of Leicestershire schools that are rated good or outstanding and the percentage of pupils who are accessing good and outstanding schools are both well above national averages and in the second quartile of all local authorities. Our Key Stage 4 data for pupils has now been released, and this data considers the progress made between the age of 11 and 16 by each pupil in 8 subject areas. Leicestershire pupils made similar progress to last year with a score of minus 0.1, which is just below the expected score of 0. And it puts us at a similar level to our statistical neighbours as well. In relation to vulnerable groups in education, we have had our provisional data for children in care achieving our expected standards at the end of Key Stage 2, and it is low compared to our 2016 national averages. And again, our progress for pupils eligible for free school meals places us in the 4th quartile of all local authorities. And our progress for pupils with statements of special educational needs, or EHCPs, again was good and was ranked in the top quartile for local authorities. And just finally, our NEET figures remain very positive in Leicestershire. So our current NEET figure is 2.2% of young people, and our NEET figure for young people with SEND was 3.8%, which represents around about 20 young people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Anybody? Yes, Canon Lewis.
I suppose I just wanted to just query your statement around well above national for the percentage of schools good or outstanding. Latest Ofsted was 89%, 89.6. Is that well above? And also I wondered if you had the breakdown for primary and secondary in that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Apologies, I probably shouldn't have inserted the word well. We do have a breakdown of the numbers of Ofsted for outstanding, both for we do have a breakdown for primary, a breakdown for secondary. We also have a breakdown for academies and non-academies as well.
Would it be possible to have those after for them to be forwarded? Thank you.
Yes, that will be. Mrs. Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. On page 42, under the vulnerable groups, point 31 about the children in care achieving expected standards. It's good to see there has been an improvement since 2016, but we're still quite low compared to the national average. We any reason for that, or what are we doing to try and improve that at all?
Mr. Ords.
I've always come back on questions like that with the making the point that we, compared to our benchmarking authorities, have fewer children in care than most other authorities because of the excellent work that we do to avoid taking children into care in the first place. What that then means is, and I've discussed this with Ofsted representatives, the children that you do have in care are those who are not as representative of the sample and ability as other authorities have got. So inevitably we end up not doing as well in that area as I would like us to do, simply because the cohorts that we've got in are those who can't be accommodated within an extended family. It's not the most scientific of answers, but Ofsted haven't been able to come back at me on it yet.
Mr. Sheehan.
Paragraph 28 and thereabouts, we do have this concern ongoing about underperformance from boys. Can we have some sight of any academic research which is current or recent that will give us some insight into this, please?
It's always been there, isn't it?
Anything further on that? Sorry, biology. It is a long-running but complex area, I think. Shall we move on to item 10, please? The Ofsted Inspection Framework. Sharon Cook will present the report. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. You should, as well as a report, I'll take you through this presentation that Anna's now coming with a clicker. Do I just click? Yeah, okay. Oh, and all my colleagues have run away. The mention of Ofsted. Right. Ofsted at the end of last year, November, published their new inspection framework that has now come into force. So the ethos behind this is that, as members will know, the previous single inspection framework very much focused on a 3-yearly rota of authorities being inspected, and authorities that were from requires improvement right up to outstanding wouldn't really see an Ofsted inspection for the next at least 3 years, and only those authorities where they went into intervention and they were seen to be inadequate had regular progress monitoring visits. What Ofsted have tasked themselves with doing within the new system is ensuring that they have more regular contact with all local authorities, and what they want to do within their framework is see not only what will be the 3 yearly inspection, a more formal and rigorous inspection, and I'll talk a little bit more detail about that later, but also as part of their contact they will have annual conversations with each director, who prior to that conversation will have submitted an up-to-date self-assessment saying on where they believe the local authority is at, using evidence and performance to support that evaluation. That's submitted, an annual conversation takes place that looks at that in some detail, and the purpose or what's behind that is Ofsted feel that not only can they note progress and hopefully good practice, but they would, with the director, identify any areas of concern, either concerns identified by the local authority and what they're doing about it and endorse what they're doing, or maybe Ofsted come in, the worst scenario would be the local authority hadn't identified those concerns, but Ofsted, in looking at the self-assessment and the data, identified the concerns. And what they want to do is be having those earlier discussions and supporting authorities to achieve and to achieve well for the children and families that we serve. As a note for Leicestershire, our annual conversation is to take place early in March, so in February we will be submitting the self-assessment that we're currently working on to Ofsted, and that conversation will be with the director but with other key officers and people within the authority. From the annual conversations point of view, you don't get a grading, but the authority will receive a letter either endorsing progress, endorsing the outcome of the conversation, or the worst scenario would be highlighting areas of concern. If there are areas of concern, then Ofsted are likely to come back to do their more in-depth inspection in a shorter time space than the 3 years that's set. So the actual sorry, I'm going off the slides. The actual system is around an even greater focus on practice and reflecting on the experience of children and young people that live in the area. So local authorities, so this is the 3 yearly inspection. So local authorities judged to be good will get a 1 week short inspection every 3 years, and local authorities, that's good or outstanding, and local authorities judged to require improvement to be good will get a 2 week standard every 3 years. So on our last inspection, which requires improvement, when we are next formally inspected, we will get a 2 week assessment inspection. Authorities that are deemed to be inadequate will continue, as understandably, to get far more greater input from Ofsted and to get that monitoring and inspection. But the focus of the visits, the focus of the inspection visits and the annual conversations will be about identifying good practice, celebrating that good practice, but also catching local authorities before they fall. So they're trying to say, rather than a deficit model of coming in and for authorities that have really struggled and are seen to be inadequate, by the way that Ofsted will engage now, they should hope to be cited on those difficulties and to support our local authorities before they got to that position. So this frame just gives you the pathway, really, of the authorities, as I've just outlined. If you are good or outstanding, you'll get that shorter inspection. If you requires improvement, it's a standard inspection. And if you're inadequate, there's more regular monitoring visits, and you will be re-inspected at an earlier stage to show the progress that you should have made. In between those inspection processes and the annual conversations, there are also themed visits that will be undertaken. So the current theme that Ofsted are looking at is domestic abuse and child sexual exploitation. So if during the next 6 months Leicestershire were to receive a themed inspection visit, that's the area that they would be focusing upon, and they will be looking at children and young people that within either of those two categories, and about our response and our work with those young people. So what does this mean for Leicestershire? As I've already outlined, last time we requires improvement to be good. So when we get our next inspection, our last inspection was 12 months ago, so our next formal inspection should be in 2 years' time. We will get that 2 weeks. We will get a thorough inspection to see whether we've made the progress that we need to make to be good or above. We will get in between those that formal inspection, we will get these focus visits. So we will have 2 focused annual conversations, the first of which takes place in March of this year, and either next year just an annual conversation, or we could get a focus visit for either of them and one of the themed meetings. So that's really where we're at within the framework. So the self-assessment that we're completing, as well as saying where we are at in relation to the children. So the areas that they are looking at are very similar categories to before. So they're looking at the experience and progress of children in need of help and protection, including early help. The second category is children in care and achieving permanence for children. The third is care leavers and transitions. The fourth is effectiveness of leaders, managers and local governance around children's social care. And the fifth is the local authority's own evaluation of the quality and impact of its performance and practice. So it's really about the practice and the experience of the young people. So in answering those questions in our covering those areas in our self-assessment, we need to answer certain questions around what do we know about the quality and impact of social work practice in the local authority. So it's not just the doing, it's what difference has that made for children. How do we know it? So how have we evidenced it and how have we measured it? And then what are the plans for the next 12 months to, if we get to outstanding, how we're going to maintain that level, and up to getting to outstanding, how we're going to improve practice on any areas that we have identified. So the annual engagement meeting, this is the meeting with the conversation with the director and others. I'm sure I'll be involved. Can be broader than children's social care, so it can pull in what's happening around early help and early years, and education. It's not used to evaluate direct social work practice. They won't be, for the annual conversation, they won't be going out and spending time with social workers as they will in great detail when they do the 3-year inspection. But it will cover the contents and the impact of the self-evaluation. So what do we know about ourselves? Do we know ourselves well? Do we know where we're doing well, and how do we know it? How do we measure it? And do we know where we've got areas for improvement? And importantly, have we got plans in place to address and achieve what we need to under those areas for improvement? They will look at how we did in our previous inspection and what the areas and the 17 recommendations that I've reported panel before, a committee rather, before on the progress we've made against those 17 recommendations. They'll look at the current financial, political and practice context, and they'll look at the scope of possible scope of a focus visit. So if they identify during that conversation that there is something that they feel they need to be more interested in and take a closer look, they will identify as part of that conversation what they'll do. And the timing as part of the outcome, they write a letter, it's not a report, and they will give an approximate timing of the next self-evaluation and meeting. But it's basically a yearly meeting. So if they come in March, they're going to be coming at the beginning of the year after. So Leicestershire's standard inspection, so this is the inspection that should take place in another 2 years' time, will focus on children and young people's experience at different points in the system, including early help, the impact of leaders and managers, whether our own evaluation, quality of performance and practice and performance is accurate, and it's that inspection where we will get a grading. So you can't get a regrading in the annual conversations and the themed visits. You can get told how you've done and how you're progressing, but your actual grading will come at that 3 yearly. And the judgments are the judgments that I've gone through already with you, but the actual gradings remain to be inadequate, requires improvement to be good or outstanding. I think the other things on the slide, are things that I've gone through. So I've already talked about the themed visits. This just tells in more detail around the notice period that we get as part of that. Oh, there you are. Press too many buttons. Yeah, I think I've gone through what the findings are. So, and outlined it in the report. So it's whether there's any questions.
Thank you, Rosita.
Thank you for that. I don't actually know what to say, because sometimes we start fixing something that isn't broke. But I can see that this model is to be proactive rather than reactive in a way. Now, I personally would have liked to have seen a flowchart, because I can't quite get my head around it, how we get to number 1, number 2 or number 3. So I assume it's all based on the 3 yearly outcome. But if you so if you can explain that one to me again, what pathways, how do we get in there, to what pathway we are, are we number 1, 2 or 3? But what mainly concerns me, it is that in your presentation, it seems to be an awful lot of reflection on the children. And what concerns me there, it is in the public, the aspiration and expectations are always extremely high. And we can't necessarily underpin that, as we know, with the financial resources that are required. And could that possibly lead us with a high aspiration and expectation that isn't then met, and it would reflect negative onto the inspection framework? And my second a great concern, it is you referred several times to annual meetings, conversation with the director. Now, ultimately, members are responsible for all of this, and there needs to be some member input. So where is that member input, and how is are the members reflected within this framework? Thank you.
I'll try. If I don't answer everything, please tell me. The actual pathways is on the slide. Is on this slide. This will tell us, or this should tell us, sorry if it's, that from our last inspection we were requires improvement. So this just tells us the number of visits or the type of visits that will be undertaken by Ofsted. In relation to how we get to be good or above, that's part of our continuous improvement plan that I referred to, where I've come here to report on the progress we're making against the recommendations. So the progress we make, our self-assessment that makes sure that we know ourselves well and we know the areas where we're making progress against, that's part of our measured, and our Ofsted will measure us. But one of the key things is about practice and experience of children. So it's right, and I would say it is right and it's proper that we have high expectations and aspirations for all our children. Ofsted will look at our practice, will spend time with social workers, and they will judge whether what we're doing is really making a difference, and that's how we'll get to good or outstanding. In relation to the financial information, if I've understood you correctly, as part of the category and judgment around leadership and effectiveness of leadership, they will want to look at and will look at whether we are effectively using our resources to achieve those outcomes that I've already outlined. So authorities that have already been graded good or above are not authorities that have endless funds available. Part of that grading is whether we spend our money and what resources we've got effectively and appropriately.
And now conversations with the directors, where's the members' input and how we ensure that there is a members' input?
The 3-yearly inspection looks at governance and political sign-up, and we'll look at part of the governance. We'll look at what members' role, look at overview and scrutiny, look at lead member role. We'll look at the format and structure we have here for the different panels. So that was always part of the inspection and will continue to be part of the inspection. In relation to the annual conversations that take place in between those main inspections, Ofsted are very clear at this stage that is the director and anybody that they feel needs to be in that conversation. So that is, I mean, Paul can answer this, but that is likely to be me, but it's likely to be Ivan as lead member as well. But Ofsted are clear that the key element for them is that conversation with the director.
May I just come back? While Ofsted may be clear, but maybe they are not aware of how the political process works, because at the end of the day, they are not politicians. And even in an annual conversation, there will be a strategic overview, which is agreed with the lead member and the director. So if you take the lead members and the members out of the process, it is politically, I think, not effective. So I'll just voice that comment, for whatever, not wishing them to tell Granny to suck eggs, but I think there are some flaws within this system. Thank you.
Can I just ask, you're saying that even though we require improvement, we only get another inspection in 3 years? And do the focused visits are just the themes that Ofsted plan for nationally, or are they targeted to areas they feel need improvement?
The annual conversation with the director will focus on our self-assessment, and that will look very much, and does look very much, around the progress we're making against our Ofsted continuous improvement plan. So they will come very well informed about what Ofsted found when they came in and completed our last inspection, what the areas were of improvement, and whether our planning and our activity and our progress is evidenced in the data and performance that we provide. And although they describe that as a conversation, I'm sure that will be a very challenging process for Paul. In relation to the themed visits, they decide upon those themed visits, and not every authority is seen. So over the next 6 months, the theme's domestic abuse and child sexual exploitation. So the authorities they come to, they will give the parameters of what those visits will be, and that will be the focus. And in relation to the more formal, more detailed inspection, it was a 3-yearly cycle before, but I think as committee members will be aware, because of the number of authorities to be inspected and because some of the issues around capacity in Ofsted, many authorities waited far longer than 3 years, or have waited far longer than 3 years for that inspection.
Chairman, could we ask maybe through you, the lead member, what his thoughts are on this?
Paul?
So about the lead member involvement, Ofsted did come to us and say, would you like to have your lead member involved? And of course we said no. That's a joke, by the way.
You're on film, so
I think it's a good point, and what I will do is speak to the lead inspector about whether we do involve our lead member. So just to pick up on the point about the 3-yearly cycle, if the whole point of this new approach for Ofsted is to get a lot closer to authorities, I think they got quite worried at one point that some authorities they'd not seen had any detailed contact with for a number of years. And in certain situations, I think they were a bit shocked by some of the results of the inspection. So the whole idea of this is to keep a closer contact with authorities. If in that contact they picked up any concerns, then I think it's pretty certain that authority would have an inspection sooner than the 3 years. I think that's the whole idea, that they're better sighted in terms of intelligence and decide when they need to get in and get involved. So,
I think that was my point, actually, that 3 years seemed a long time if there was areas of improvement. Ivan?
Thank you, Chair. I would say for my own part, I'm not quite as comfortable with the new Ofsted setup as Paul is. I do think that Rosita's touched on a very important point. You hold me to account, the full County Council holds me to account, and should it be that we're now going to be inspected and there are no political people being part of that process, it's very difficult to see how anybody can be held to account once the report has been written. And Dave Mellon, who is my equivalent in Nottingham City, they were a pilot authority for the new Ofsted framework, and he had to argue with the inspectors to actually get interviewed. They were not going to interview him. And since then, at East Midlands lead members level, there have been discussions around the fact that it could be that even the senior officers are seen as less contributory than the people who enjoy the service. It seems to be service-orientated, service-led, and the views of young people and the families that they come from. But I think Rosita makes a really important point, and one would hope that the LGA Children's Board would take this up with the relevant ministers and get it sorted.
And Chairman, could we have that recorded, please, that point?
It would seem to me Ofsted in schools take in all the governors for information gathering, etc., and I see no reason why that shouldn't be the case in this authority. Any other points on Ofsted? No? In that case, I'll thank all the officers. It's been a long afternoon. Date of next meeting. The next meeting of Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny Committee is scheduled to take place on Monday the 5th of March at 1:30. There are no urgent items, so I'd like to thank you for attending the meeting, and the meeting's now closed. Thank you.